so I challenge you to think about what is the most important thing in your life and what would you be willing to do to protect that. Say you've come up with the notion that your children are the most important thing in your life. If you ask most parents, they'd be willing to do anything to defend and protect their children, including sometimes behavior that may not be socially acceptable, but in extreme circumstances to protect your children, you would do that. Now, in the addiction, the substance now becomes the most important thing in the person's life. And so if that is priority, exactly what we just said about the children will apply to the substance. The substance user becomes willing to do anything to defend the substance use. And that willingness to defend the substance use will extend to lying, will extend to denial to even self that that's going on, but certainly denial to other people. And denial is a psychological defense mechanism that keeps us from experiencing our own feelings. So certainly no one would want to believe about themselves that a chemical is the most important thing in their life. So if you look at it that way, denial makes a whole lot of sense. To say to self, oh no, that can't be. So denial is a defense mechanism. Denial and lying are two different things. Denial is the defense mechanism that keeps us from experiencing our feelings related to something that's really uncomfortable for us. And certainly the notion that you're developing addiction would be an uncomfortable notion for most people. Let me say this. I've worked with thousands of substance abusers and substance-dependent people over the course of my career, and I have never met one, not one, addict that started out their chemical use with the goal of becoming an addict. Nobody picks up their first drink and says, well, I think I'll become an alcoholic. This is a process, remember, that progresses through the spectrum that tends to happen to 10%, 15% of our population. Most people will use substances their whole life, or alcohol or whatever, their whole life, and never develop an addictive disorder. This person picked up their first drink and sets off a chain of events over which they have little control once that ball starts rolling downhill. They did not set out to become an addict. That's very key. Okay. Back up. These internal changes that happen early in addiction are changes in relationship to the substance. It is hard to see that. The addict will begin to perhaps sneak to use their substance, perhaps before going to a cocktail party. Someone that's a little anxious may drink a couple of drinks on the sly before going to the cocktail party just to get a little bit comfortable. That is a change in relationship to the alcohol, meaning you're using the alcohol not as a social thing, but you're using it now to medicate the feelings, and that alcohol becomes the solution rather than a social opportunity. So those internal changes, the changes in the way the person sees the substance, happens. At this point, as the progression continues, the person will cross into middle stage addiction. And there's some important things that happen in this transition from early to middle stage addiction. Of course, we've talked about increase in tolerance. That happens. We've talked about denial. We've talked about the substance now becomes priority. And again, thinking about when something is a priority to you, you do anything to defend it. As this progresses, we move into middle stage addiction. Middle stage addiction is characterized by external changes. You now can see and measure and look at the addict and know that there are life consequences going on from the substance use. These may be family problems, social problems. So in the family, let me back up. The family, there may now be a lot of tension about the chemical use. The family may be complaining about the chemical use. The family may be having arguments about the chemical use. The addict whose priority is to use the chemical will then lie and cover up and sneak and deny. The family at this point sees this behavior going on and will usually attempt to deal with it in a very rational way. In other words, to say to the addict, don't you see what you're doing? Now, of course, the addict, based on what you know now, says, of course I don't see what I'm doing. What's wrong with you? So then that sets up conflict in the family. And that conflict will get started and it progresses over time. At some point in this family conflict, the topic of substances will very often become a very difficult topic. So family members might stop talking about the substances, but will try to manage the behavior. And certainly the addict will stop talking about the substances because the addict wants to stay as far away from that topic as possible because the priority is to continue to use the substance. So we've got family conflicts dynamics set up. We've got social problems set up. Typically, as the addiction develops, the addict will begin to avoid people that don't approve of the drinking or drug use. So we'll begin to gravitate toward people that only support the drug use. Financial problems will happen. It costs a lot to use alcohol and drugs, and the priority is to use the alcohol and drugs, so the addict will begin to use alcohol, will spend money on alcohol and drugs and not pay bills, will take money out of the family budget to use the substances. Legal problems happen. DUIs, arrest for substance use, drunken disorderly charges, a lot of financial consequences from that as well.